Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into OTRAM's YouTube channel, your source for Land Cruiser maintenance and repair videos. Today we've got a 2000 100 series with a stripped spline on the drive flange and CV axle. So I figured today would be a good day to show how to change a CV axle on a 100 series. I've already gone and soaked all of the hardware that we're going to be undoing with Freol to try to make it come apart a little bit easier. And I've already taken the ABS harness loose. It snakes up through here and up to the engine side. I undid this before I put it in the air because we're going to take the whole spindle off. You might be tempted to take it apart down here at the bottom end because it looks like it'd be easier to do. The problem with that is they like to swell in the knuckle bore and they'll break taking them apart. So it's a lot easier to undo it up at the plug. So first, we're going to take apart all of the clamps that are holding this wiring and the brake lines on. And I walked over here without my impact. And these are all just 12 millimeters. Oop. Drop my socket. There's one up here on the back. That one was right here. And we've got one on the control arm. And it is really common for these fasteners to break. And you want to separate, actually, it's easier if you do this in the other order. So let me put that back in. I'll hook that back onto the spindle. You want to take the brake line one free first. Or not. Let me see if I can get the other one. Okay, the ABS wire one will come loose. We just want the ABS and the brake line to be two separate things. There we go. So now that's separate. And we're happy there. Separate that guy. And I'm just going to flop this over here out of my way for a moment. And next we need to take the caliper off. So let me swing you around there. And then our caliper, there's two 17 millimeter bolts back here. We're going to go ahead and undo those. And I'm going to take my handy dandy caliper hanger, hook it through here, and then hook it up over the frame rail, because you don't want the caliper to hang from its rubber line. You can mess up the internal hose and ruin the brake line. So bring you back around out here to the front. Turn my backlight off. And I'm actually going to jump inside and I'm going to turn the steering wheel straight real quick. You don't need to turn the steering wheel back and forth. I just moved it to make it easier to get a view of the back of the caliper. So now I can move this more out of my way back there. So next, I'm going to take this dust cap off. And hopefully this will come off pretty easily because I've already had it off once to inspect. And there we go. Once it starts to pop, you just work around and just a chisel working around the edge. You're just getting in behind this flange here to knock it loose. And I did not get my snap ring pliers. So now we can take our snap ring off that holds the axle in. And these parallel opening snap ring pliers work awesome for this. So pull that off. And then I'm gonna grab a 14 and take all my my flange bolts off. Okay, I'm gonna grab my bigger impact. It looks like whoever had these off last siliconed them all back together and way over tightened them. And that is awesome. This one's just spinning on the stud. So that one's going to be fun to take off. It feels like they've cross-threaded half of these. Where'd my other... I'm going to take all the flat washers off of here real quick so I don't lose them. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to do about this one yet. Okay, so since this stud was going to have to be replaced anyway from being stripped out, I went ahead and just took the welder and welded what was left of the nut to the stud to keep it from spinning. And then I just put an extractor socket on there. And then we can just pull the whole stud with the bad nut. And I'm not going to knock that out of here right now because that is going to be hot. So there's one stud out of there. And now we just need to take the cone washers out. And these are probably going to be interesting with the amount of silicone sealer that's on there. And we're just going to take a brass drift and actually I'm going to get my brass hammer to do this. Get my hammer so it's easier to get a good hit. And when hack jobs fill these in with silicone, like, why do you need a wad of silicone like that on the cone washers? Use the proper gasket. It makes these real fun to get back out. There we got one to pop. There's another one. You see, get a pair of pliers and see if I can grab those out of there. So these cone washers are tapered, and the taper is what locks them in there and acts as a lock nut. But when you silicone them, it kind of glues them in there, and they won't pop back out. Okay, so there we go. Now, we should be able to pop our flange off, which normally at this point will just come off. But because somebody has siliconed it, and this one's also fun. The splines are stripped out on this flange, so it's not wanting to line up. There we go. To pop off of there. Yeah, and see there's somebody's wadded even more. And this isn't even automotive silicone. It's like household caulk. Yeah, these are gross. Surprisingly enough, the wheel bearings still feel decent. But yeah, let me see if I can get you in here better to see these splines. They're just completely chewed off. This guy was driving down the highway and completely lost forward momentum because the spline stripped out. He had to lock the center diff to get it to keep coming, or to keep going. So I'm going to move you around here to the back for the next shot. And grab my little light. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this steering arm off. Rather than undo the tie rod taper, we're going to undo the arm from the back of the spindle. And it's just a 19. And then there's one bolt there, and then there's one further back that's pretty much right under the spindle. There we go, and now that guy's loose, except I forgot to take that 112mm out. That's holding the ABS wire on. go. And then we can swing that kind of down and out of our way. I think the next thing we're going to do, and while I've got it with a good visual, we're going to take this lower ball joint loose. So we'll undo the cotter pin. Get that guy out of there. And it is a 22, not a 24. Or I'm sorry, it's a 24, not a 22. I'm going to pop that guy loose. I'm going to swing this steering arm back up here. And then I'm just going to take usually those come off quite a bit easier than that. Okay, so I missed getting the rest of the spindle on camera. The lower ball joint was a complete bear to get loose. I ended up having to pop the upper ball joint loose so that I could pivot the spindle out and get a better angle on the lower ball joint. You know, and once the ball joints are loose, at the stage we were at, the spindle pulls off. So now we're ready to actually pop the axle out of the differential. And you can see right here, this is the differential tube, and then this is your axle. So what we're going to do is take a pry bar or a punch and put it in that groove in the axle. And that's the safer way to do it, but this one's of course not cooperating. So we're going to do it the not so great way. We're going to stick it in that gap. Oh, and now it wants to walk right out. And you're going to lose some gear oil, so don't be directly under that when it pops. And then you can just fish the axle shaft out and set it off to the side, and then I'll bring you around back to the front. So now we're back around to the front. You can see I've popped my upper ball joint, I've popped my lower ball joint, and I've got my spindles laying off to the side there. And you can see here's the hole we took the axle shaft out of and the axle side seal. And I am going to leave that seal alone. Now would be an opportune time to change it, but as rusty crusty as this truck is, I don't want to pull that seal, and it wasn't leaking, so we're going to leave it alone. So when you go to put your new axle shaft in, there's a snap ring right here on the end, and that's what retains this. That's what we were trying to pry against a minute ago. So we're going to fish this in here. We're going to be gentle around our seal, and we're going to kind of spin it. You'll feel the splines line up. And then you just kind of give it a good shove, and it'll go in there, and it'll lock into that snap ring and hold everything in there. And now we can come over here and we can grab our spindle. And in the back of the spindle here, there's this bushing and a roller bearing. I'm going to put a little bit of fresh grease on those and around the axle shaft here before I put those back in. I'm just going to use just some wheel bearing grease. I'm just going to use my finger to pack it back into that bearing. And onto the back of that thrust bushing. And I'll give it a little smear on here, just for good measure. Get that out of the way and go wipe my hands. Okay, so now we're ready to put the spindle back on. I got my 2 ball joint nuts handy because this is going to get heavy quick. You're going to take this and you're going to slide the axle through, and then you're going to lift up to get your lower ball joint back through and lightly start that lower nut. And we're just going to gently slop that to the side for a minute. Let me pan you up. I'm going to hook a pry bar under my control arm here so I can pry down on it. I'm going to push back. And if I'd been smart, I would have done this during the day while Danny was here. You know what? I'm going to grab my jack and I'm going to lift the lower control arm up a hair to give me a little bit more play here. Sometimes you get lucky and everything will kind of just glide back together. But I guess the way this truck came apart, I really shouldn't have been expecting that. And of course, being on the low lift, I'm right on the edge. Let's see if that gives us enough room. Yeah, I think that'll get us. So we can pry that down and hold that until we can get our upper ball joint nut started. And we can pull that out. And I'm just going to snug that one up a little bit. And we'll tighten this after we've put the steering arm back on. We'll torque it. To pop the upper ball joint, pretty much the same as the lower. I took the cotter pin out, loosened the nut up, but didn't take it all the way off. And then you can see this like square boss right here. A couple of sharp whacks with a hammer, and it'll jar that joint loose. So let me lower this guy back down. And if you're on jack stands, be careful doing that with a jack because it's real easy to knock the truck off the jack stands. I'm gonna go ahead and snug up. But first I'm gonna fish my ABS harness through so it's out of my way. And then I'm gonna snug up this ball joint nut. bolt's wanting to spin on me. There we're going. Sometimes the ball joints, the shaft will want to spin rather than the nut tightening down, especially if you've nicked one of the castle nut pieces, taking it off. So sometimes it's helpful to get it started with an impact. There we go. That should be good enough for me to, yeah, that'll let me start torquing it. So I'm gonna feed my ABS harness back through here. And I'm gonna stick my steering arm in. And I'm gonna wipe my hand in that grease as many times as I possibly can. I'm gonna grab my 2 steering arm bolts. And I'm gonna put some red Loctite on each of them. And then I'm gonna start them back. And be gentle when you're starting these. They're a fairly fine thread, and the arm wants to kind of flop around back here. So it makes them real easy to start cross-threaded. So you just want a real light touch. Until you've got the first couple threads going. And I know you guys are just waiting for me to hit myself in the head with the ratchet. So we're going to snug these. And I'm going to grab my torque wrench, because I did not get that out already. And these guys are 108 foot-pounds. There's that one. Let's see, I'm going to have to come around from this way to get this one. There we go. So there, our steering arm is back on there, and that'll help hold everything from flopping around while we torque the upper and lower ball joints. And the lower is 117 foot-pounds. So we'll just reach right under here. There we go, there's 117. And our cotter pin even lined up. Sweet. And then our top one is going to go to 81 foot-pounds. I'm going to grab my smaller torque wrench because it's easier to fit in there. I'll tighten this one up to 81. And we need to go just a bit further to get that a little bit more. And there are cotter pin holes lined up. Grab some cotter pins. Stick our cotter pin through here in the bottom. We can stick one through up here at the top and fold that over. So now everything's back through there and happy. Clean some of the shmoo off here. And this would be an ideal time to repack your wheel bearings, replace your wheel bearings, replace your brake rotors, go through and service any of that. But that is not the topic of this video. Okay, so our next real step would be to put our gasket in here. We always have like 8 million of these gaskets in stock, and somehow I don't have one today. But you know, you put your axle in, you'd slide your drive flange on, and this one's a new one because the other one was stripped out. And then we'll just reach through from the back and push your axle out. And you can go ahead and put your snap ring back in. I'm going to go to Toyota tomorrow and grab new hardware for all of this because it was just in terrible condition. I'm going brain dead. But you know, if you were carrying on, you'd put, you know, a cone washer, a flat washer, and then a nut, and then snug your nuts down. All these have been previously chewed up, so I'm gonna replace all this. So I'm not gonna show that, but you can see we're back on there, and then we can come around back over to here. We can go ahead and unhook our brake caliper, slide it back on there. And same thing with these bolts. They're real easy to cross thread, so sometimes it helps to kind of wiggle the caliper around to jump those up on there. Whew. Terrible sound. And then these guys get torqued to 91. There we go. And now we can just start, move you up a little bit. we go. Oh, and you're also going to want to put your dust cap back on there. I'm not putting mine on yet because I haven't put the gasket on behind there. So now we can start down here at our ABS harness. We can just start rerouting that. Where did I set? There it is. Get that guy in there. That one was on the back of the steering arm. We can come around to the side here. Get this one that goes into the side of the spindle. And then I fished this at some point the wrong way around. So we're going to fish that guy back in there. And as these fish together, there's little tabs that kind of lock them to where they need to go. That one flips over that way. Just snake that back through up to there. Okay, so I went back and started editing this video, and I got to the end and realized that the camera, for some reason, cut out for like the last couple of minutes. So yeah, I didn't want it to just abruptly end where the camera cut off, so I figured I'd tack this on to the end. All you really missed was the last few bolts holding the ABS wiring harness onto the upper control arm, and then plugging it back in up under the hood. Beyond that, we'd already finished everything. So yeah, I hope you found this useful. And if you did, please subscribe below. And if you really liked it, check out our Patreon link down in the description. We appreciate the support. And thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Appreciate it.